So let's move on. So ultimately, my IMC team covers these different areas. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart. You don't need to write it down, but we look at the racing operations and how that works. We have people who are focused on technology innovation. We have a sports car business. We have market and research, media research that helps us drive our decisions. Our business team, our broadcast and entertainment, very broad. It was 3 years ago, all focused on the competition. I mean, I don't want to say all, but primarily the team was made up of people who would just go to the track and focus on what was going on in the competition. And now it's a broader group, and then the people who are in competition, like Miss Laura Finley, are broader and more versatile thinkers and doers. So they realize that there's a bigger world outside of just showing up, making sure the drivers get in front of the media when they need to, and then going home on Sunday night or Monday morning. So I thought today, any questions? You're good? Good? All right. That we do a couple case studies. I'll show you a few things. Hopefully that'll prompt some of my thoughts, ideas, and showcase a little bit about how NASCAR has made some adjustments to what we do. So first is I talk a little bit about influencers. So it's a buzzword perhaps, but the idea is that we can't talk to everybody. I can talk to Miss Panama here, I can talk to Miss Sex and the City here, but the reality is that I'm not going to be able to have those conversations one-on-one with our fans and with our media. So we need to make sure that we have influence on the people who have the biggest influencers out there. So we decided a couple years ago to adopt this approach in which we identified what we call now our Big 12. And it's a stupid name, but you know, the Big 10 is 14 people, so it's, you know, whatever. At least it's 12. It actually was 13 for a while, but we changed that. But so these are people who have an inordinate amount of influence on how others feel about us, and also on how other media cover us. So what the New York Times will say will be seen by others, and that will impact what they think about NASCAR and their perception on NASCAR. So Sports Illustrated, who you know, one of the NASCAR writers, Lars Anderson, who is now a teacher here, who's covered our sport, had an inordinate high level of influence on how other people thought about our sport. So we actually take an approach like an advertising agency account. So we have members of our team whose job is to own that account. So that means if you're on the Sports Illustrated account team, you better know when the swimsuit issue's coming out, when the sportsman's issue's coming out, who's driving their advertising, who's the NASCAR editor. You need to know that product. You need to know who they are, who are the people that make influence, who make the decisions. So I met with the executive editor of Sports Illustrated on Tuesday when I was in New York. He doesn't follow NASCAR that much. First guy I ever hired in my whole career, so he's got a little bit of, you know, need to meet with me since he owes me forever. But just working him to make sure that he was seeing what was going on in the NASCAR world with Lars Anderson, who's now teaching here full time and no longer writing for it, transitioning away and then bringing in a new person. And we're really happy. We actually think this is good. Whereas Lars had a bigger stature, they have a new, younger African-American writer who's covering our sport now. So I actually like that because he's actually bringing a different perspective. He's actually bringing a different background to our sport, and we think that will help. So these are the ones for various reasons why they're in there. Certainly if something seems odd, please ask, but Charlotte Observer is important as opposed to the local paper here because everybody in our sport, the drivers and our teams, live in Charlotte. So what Jim Utter, the writer of the Charlotte Observer, says about NASCAR, that's what's going to be read by the general manager at Richard Childress Racing, Jimmy Johnson, Jimmy Johnson's wife, Jimmy Johnson's wife's best friend, and those are the people who will have impact. So that's why it's important for us to be very focused on the Charlotte Observer. And I was going to do my Jim Utter imitation, but I just don't think it'll play here. Anyway, so here's a little story about how influencers work and why they're important. So one of our issues, and I talked about this with some of the students earlier today. Am I good? I'm talking too much? Oh, I'm hitting it. Oh, sorry. Jeez, you Alabama people are so high maintenance. Oh, I can't. So this is a guy who works for that age, basically trashed us, all right, and said, I told him I thought NASCAR was boring. So what we did was we said, we'll give him the Laura Finley red carpet treatment before we even hired Laura Finley. So come to a race. Come see what we're doing. Come see why we're doing it. So we brought him there. We hosted him. And he went away and he wrote this amazing article in Ad Age, which has impact because that's what the advertising people read. And those advertising people are making decisions for major companies. So he wrote this personal blog and he said positive things. And this is why it's important. Because these companies who are trying to decide between sponsoring NASCAR, sponsoring a NASCAR driver, sponsoring a NASCAR team, or the NFL, or the NBA, or an under-the-table payment to a University of Alabama running back prospect. I'm just making sure you guys are paying attention. They have to make decisions, all right? So this guy has influence beyond his blog. So that's where we target and focus our attention. Doesn't mean we ignore the locals. Part of what Laura does is when she's assigned to a particular market, it's to make sure that the local media are covering us. It's important because we got to make sure that it feels big and we're attracting people to the seats and all that kind of stuff. But it also is when we bring in a sponsor or we're courting a sponsor and they pick up the local paper and they see NASCAR's on page 5 as opposed to page 1 in the sports section, that's not good either. So that's another reason. For example, we put an inordinate amount of our attention on our Sonoma race, which is the one that he went to, because that's where Silicon Valley is. So if NASCAR's in town and we're actually not relevant to the San Francisco Chronicle, then that tells our guests that maybe they're not as big as they're telling us we are. So that's part of our logic behind that. Any questions on that? I'm sure you guys are saving all your questions up. All right, so we created this online site, and this was a way to reach out to millennials. We needed to find a way to become a little bit more relevant in the digital space. So we've actually invited millennial bloggers to become part of this inner circle in which they actually sign an agreement with us to be able to get exclusive access to certain type of content that they can actually share with their followers. And they can win prizes and they can go to events and all that kind of stuff. So that's not only helping us drive coverage about us through groups of influential people, it's also educating us. What is it that they picked up? Is it the Dale Jr. won Daytona story, or is it the Krispy Kreme burger that gets your taste buds racing, So we learn as we go about it because we can have metrics that will show us what gets the most picked up and what gets shared. So another story in which we used an IMC model on was when we rolled out a new car. So back in 2007, before I was there and Laura was there and probably half of the IMC team, they introduced a new car and it was badass, and they called it the car of tomorrow, and they talked about this is going to be the safest car ever, and even better, it was going to save money for the teams. All right? So the first race won by Kyle Busch, he gets on Fox and he says, I'm still not a fan of these things. These cars suck. All right? So from the get-go, several things we did wrong. It's easy to say several things you did wrong when you weren't there. I make at least 7 mistakes a day, just for the record. Car of tomorrow. Somebody sitting in a marketing office thought that was pretty cool. For our audience, it just didn't sound right. It felt forced. Safety. Hey, do you want to go to a NASCAR race? It's really safe. Nobody gives a rat's ass about how safe the race is. They actually want the opposite. They want it to be dangerous. And here's the worst one, right? We're saving all these millionaires millions of dollars. That's going to get you to spend $85 on a ticket. So that was a problem. And go back to what I talked about earlier, being integrated. If we didn't have the drivers on our side singing the praises, we were lost. So what they did is, I should they, because I was fairly new, what we did was we actually assembled a team led by the communications group, an internal project that we called Project Ignition. And it can be kind of a goofy name because it's internal. It wasn't an external name, but it was, we need to reignite our fans and introduce a new car to the track. So we had a 15-month strategy, not a 15-day strategy. We started talking to the manufacturers before we launched it. And we took this thing on tour. And we called it the Gen 6 car. And the reason why we called it the Gen 6 car was not because we came up with this really cool idea in advertising. It's because we sat down with the guys who live and breathe the sport, our officials who call it, who talk to the teams, and just said, what's this new car? How's it going to be different? And they talked, blah, 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 this, this, this. Next thing we know, we actually learned that this was the 6th generation of cars dating back to 62 years ago when NASCAR started. So that came from the ground up, and it was authentic. And it's cool. I think it's a cool name. I don't know what you guys think, but Gen 6 at least seemed modern, but actually its roots are historical. So we were able to do some stuff on the communications front where we showed the 6 generations of the car. So that, again, remember what I talked about earlier? Core fans love that. Love history, love seeing history, love understanding what it is that where things came from. All right? And yet it was modern. We didn't talk about safety. We didn't talk about cost savings. What we talked about was that these cars were going to look and feel more like the cars that you can go buy. And what had happened is they'd moved away. NASCAR had shifted away in its previous version of the car, so it didn't look like the Camry or the Chevy SS or the Ford Fusion. And the Gen 6 cars were built with that in mind because the manufacturers, several of those executives sitting right there in Detroit, they're trying to sell cars through our sport. And if you don't think that's what the NBA is doing, they're selling sponsorships. That's what their teams want. That's what their owners want, is to sell product. So we might be more out there because you see a lot of the sponsors, but every sport has the same exact goals. So we then rolled out this road to Daytona. We brought our cars into markets. We had our drivers do interviews. We actually built around the brand of the Daytona 500. And we got a sponsor, Sunoco, to sponsor this tour, which makes sense. If you're going from city to city and you're fueled by Sunoco, that's cool. It's authentic. It doesn't seem forced. Most importantly, we got to our drivers early and often, and we explained to them, Jimmy, this car is helping Chevy. You need to be behind this. Tell us what you like about it, what you don't like about it. But you know what? If we're going to sell you and we're going to sell your sport, come into the hauler, bitch and moan at Robin Pemberton, our VP of communication, competition, scream at Higdon, yell at Laura Finley, whatever, but do that inside, because that'd be like sticking out a sign, opening a restaurant and sticking a sign out and saying, you know, the crab cakes here suck. but come on in, have dinner. Just doesn't make sense. So we really work closely with the drivers, teams, and everyone to get them to understand it. And our favorite guy here who said the last car sucked actually said it was the best, that he was behind it fully. It's not because he didn't believe it. It's just he understood the ramifications if he went off the ranch. It wasn't good for him, wasn't good for Toyota, wasn't good for NASCAR. So that's what we do in communications, is we make sure that they understand the ramifications about it. So, and again, to our influencers, USA Today, Sports Business Daily, the ones who have impact on our business, we were with them often, pushing through our messaging. So here's an example of one of our ads.
Love that new car smell.
So nobody had ever seen that before from NASCAR, a commercial like that. But what does that do? Right there, it very clearly connects that car you're going to watch on Sunday because it's a cool sport with why these guys are spending millions and millions of dollars to be in our sport, which is to go buy their automobiles. So that connection helped. So we talked earlier about the decisions that we've had to make over the last 48 hours related to our penalties. That's being driven a lot by how we listen. How we listen to people who are following us on Twitter. How many people saw my Twitter handle up there and has already tweeted at me and said how great I was? Anyone yet? No? No? No one? All right. Hashtag NASCAR, you'll get millions of people to follow you. We'll actually see what you say. So lie, please. So we have this Fan and Media Engagement Center, and I'll actually let them explain it to you because we worked with HP. That's Meg Whitman with our CMO, Steve Phelps, put together a tool that for us is critical because it allows us to listen to our consumers.
On a typical race day, you start in the morning, the fans will start to fill into the track, and then as the excitement starts to build, you hear that chatter, and then as the green flag drops, that's the start of our race.
NASCAR is about excitement. You've got millions and millions and millions of fans.
As the CMO of NASCAR, my goals are to grow this sport.
Understanding what our fan base is thinking, what they want, and to have a tool to help us get there is really important.
So we partnered with HP to help us build a tool, a platform to be able to kind of listen to all of those different communications.
To understand what was happening in our sport from a dialogue standpoint.
This Fan and Media Engagement Center is the first of its kind. Nothing exists like it in all of sports or entertainment. It's changed how we do business significantly.
By far, HP was the best end-to-end solution that we had out there. And that was the consulting services we thought were better than everyone's.
On the hardware side, HP was able to deliver the blade servers we needed, the 3-part storage we needed to be able to store all this data, the servers to process all this data. On the software side, it was about the autonomy platform and being able to take the power of the idle engine, the Explorer, the Media Bin platform, and then leveraging other tools like Fusion Charts and Tableau software to be able to give us that visual presentation, being able to deliver all of the video walls, the touch screens, so we can walk up and literally interact with the wall itself and be able to drill in on content that we're able to see rich results from. Fan and Media Engagement Center allows us to collect data, understand what that means, analyze it. It allows us to respond faster. And at the end of the day, it drives results to our fans. It was more than just Twitter. It was how do we collect all of those different outlets of news media, bring them together and talk and hear as one single voice so that we can understand what's happening with our industry. At the beginning of the year, one of our large auto manufacturers launched a new car. Right as they made that announcement, we were able to go to their president and hand him a report that tracked exactly the conversations that were happening as that announcement was coming out in real time.
So you can see, for example, during a race, what are fans saying about Jimmy Johnson or Jeff Gordon or Dale Earnhardt Jr. or Tony Stewart, and why. We can take all that information and have them understand what's moving the needle for that particular driver.
It's interactions that happen during the race. So if a driver wrecks, that conversation, we're able to understand that and kind of monitor what's going on.
What things are important? what are we going to take action on? Make sure you get to Fox and have them create more explanation around that.
It's not just data, it's actionable data. Data that helps sell more tickets to their racetracks.
We truly are just scratching the surface on this thing. As our needs continue to change from what we're trying to accomplish from this big data, then we'll change with it, and it will just continue to get better and better for us.